everyone, and welcome to the Wild for Change podcast. Today, we're speaking with Judy Wilson, who formerly served as Cookpee Chief of the Nesconlith Indian Band, and she is from the Sequepum Nation. We're going to speak about the Wolf Treaty, a treaty of cultural and environmental survival. Judy has knowledge, experience, and an extensive background in First Nations land rights, human rights, children and family jurisdiction, emergency management, and supports a wide range of issues, including climate action, justice reform, environmental, and animal rights. Currently, she continues to work with several various Assembly of First Nations Chiefs committees at the national level, and current boards include the Global Indigenous Council and Rural British Columbia. Internationally, she was the lead on many national and provincial delegations to COP27 and United Nations forums in Geneva and New York. We're speaking about the wolf today because its continued survival is dependent on us. 2 million wolves cohabited North America with the native people before European colonization. Now it's estimated fewer than 6,000 wolves exist in the contiguous United States and only occupy 10% of its historic range. Wolves are a keystone species, and they are a vital and a necessary part of an ecosystem, but they're under attack and they are in need of federal protection. Thank you, Judy, for being here today and speaking to us about wolves and the Wolf Treaty.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Yes, I'm very eager to speak with you about the wolves because they are in need of our help. And I wanted to bring light about the Wolf Treaty, bring awareness to it. So can you explain why the Wolf Treaty was created and when it was created?
Yeah, the Wolf Treaty is one of the highest signed treaties amongst our tribal people. We have the Buffalo Treaty throughout North America. We also have the Grizzly Bear Treaty, which was signed by many, many nations. And after that, the Wolf Treaty came about because of the onslaught and the culling and the displacement of wolves from their habitat. And, in our culture and our way as tribal people, we know the wolf as many names. And, we have wolves in all of our territories, and we have our origins. Some of the nations have their origins that they are not only are they wolves relatives, but they're our ancestors that we came from the wolves. They are a keystone species, and we hold the wolf in high esteem because the wolf taught us so many things about hunting and about living in harmony and balance with our environment, and has guided and influenced us in many ways. Many of our people have wolves as our guide or our spiritual guidance. And, a lot of this is from really the beginning of time, because the wolf and the way they live and care for their families and their pack and their just each other, that gave us knowledge and understanding and our place in connection with Mother Earth and all of creation, really. So, that is important as a teacher and an ancestor of ours. So, it really brought a lot to our people on survival and how we would live in harmony with one another and Mother Earth, and be respectful to the wolf family. And so as a guide and a teacher, it's really important. So the tribal people came together, and because of what was happening to the wolves by state government and by industry, and from those taking up the habitat of the wolves and displacing them. The same thing happened to our tribal people. We were removed from the land, and many of our nations were erased. They were displaced, and through the doctrine, the colonial doctrine of discovery, they were saying we couldn't own land under terra nullius, that the land was vacant. And clearly it wasn't. Our tribes existed here way before that. And same with the wolves. They were even here before people were here. So I think it's important that the tribal people came up with their own way, which is by treaty. And it's actually our own laws and our own ways of life. So it seemed very natural to come up with that intertribal treaty to create awareness about the wolves and to work together collectively and collaboratively amongst our nations. So part of it was the gray wolf, as you're aware, maybe some of your listeners are aware, that it's extinct in most of the states right now. And the US Fish and Wildlife Services, I think through their data, they're saying there's about 6,000 uh, gray wolves that exist, in some parts of the states, not all parts. And that, there's some, the data, north of the border, but, there's been so much effects on the gray wolf in the lower 48 states. So in the treaty, they identify all of this information, and there's also the impact to the U.S.-Mexico border, the Mexican wolves, and also the south of the U.S. With the Mexican, as I mentioned, but also in the north as well. So, the wolves don't stop at these boundaries, the Mexican-U.S. boundary or the Canadian-U.S. Boundary. We call them medicine lines, but there's no boundary to the wolf, and there's really no boundary to our people because we existed before those borders were put in place. And I think the treaty, the biggest part of it was to honor and recognize and revitalize, the wolf and their habitat. So all of the tribes that signed it was, to restore that order and balance that's needed. And our people, as I mentioned, were caretakers and stewards of the land. So the nations came together, and they're committed and doing everything that they can, which is our inherent sacred responsibility to protect the wolves and the lands that the wolves need. So that's so important that we come together culturally and spiritually to do that. And I think a big part of that is, preserving the territories so that it could be not overdeveloped and encroached, and with all the extractive resources and the pipelines and all that displace the wolves, and the ranching as well. Because how do you we've coexisted with wolves, and it's like, how do you coexist when you're pushing into their territory, into their areas, when government and states allow that, and the U.S. Wildlife, Fish and Wildlife allow that as well. And the other thing too that's happened is the UN Declaration came about, and most of these governments signed it now, and it's accepted. So there's the human rights framework, but it's also, in being a human rights framework, for Indigenous people, we have the right to our culture and revitalization, and to our territories, and that includes the wolves. So I think that's to protect and recover the wolves. That's going to be so important for a collective effort to do that. So part of that framework is the UN Declaration. So it's signed by many people across Turtle Island, as we call it. And we want to be able to look at conservation. It's a big part of that, and also the work on the culture, government to government consultation and relationships, and looking what does it really mean under the Endangered Species Act too. So there's like a lot of work that went into the wolf treaty that's important, like continued research. And one part we looked at was conflict reductions in the territories. So like a lot of what we as our people did, it was a lot with coexistence. Even when the first settlers came, under our ways, we made space for them, but it was still under our laws and our um, standards, I guess, if you will. And with the colonial doctrine of discovery, it kind of turned that on its head, because it was more about, them owning the land and them having this economy. It wasn't living in that balance and that harmony. So it was like an opposite law to our law, living in harmony and balance with all of creation. So I think that's the other part that's important to understand. The displacement and dispossession of the lands from the wolves is the same thing that happened to our people.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing. There, what few people may not understand is protecting Indigenous land and your culture is protecting wolf territory, and there's ensuring their survival as well. As you said, they are your ancestors, so it's going hand in hand. This is not just we're all connected. It's not just about one species. It's about everybody living in harmony. And if you affect one area, there's a ripple effect affecting some other being. So that Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples is very important, because it's all encompassing. It's not just about you or the wolf, it's about everything that's in the ecosystem.
Correct. Yeah. And we have to get back to that, because the world with the climate crisis, which is man-made, we're way off that balance, and we need to get back to it. And it's going to take a lot of work. It can be done, but it's going to take a lot of effort and change of that mindset. And I know, this is the great shift, the great consciousness, the great shake up right now is really within ourselves to come to those conclusions that the way we've created the economy and the lifestyles aren't sustainable there. We can already see with post-COVID, the climate crisis is here in British Columbia. We were the epicenter of the climate crisis a few years ago. We had flooding, we had a heat dome, we had wildfires, we had just about everything you could think of, except earthquakes. But we have earthquakes where they haven't been at a great magnitude, but pretty much we had everything, the worst catastrophic weather you could think of, and a lot of our people are still displaced from that.
Wow.
And that's the climate crisis, and it's being continually fueled by the emissions that go in the air. So really the wolves are reminding us, saying that life is not sustainable and we need to change, and we need to change now. So the wolves carry a very important message. If the wolves are gone, that means another keystone species is gone. And that means we're tipping even further off balance than we are. So when we're fighting for the wolves, we're fighting for the existence of everyone.
Exactly. And I think that's the most important message that needs to be brought out there to the public, is that it is for the wolf, but it's not just for the wolf. It's for everybody. Because, and we were just discussing this before we started the podcast, is how much the wolf contributes to the ecosystem, and what happened when they were reintroduced into Yellowstone is that trees that were not growing because the elk had overgrazed were growing again, and the water was cleaner, and the fish came back, and songbirds came back, and there's this ripple effect. But I think what human beings miss is that affects us too. It's not just somewhere miles away in a forest or a national park or in the mountains that this ecosystem could be thriving. That affects the whole planet.
Yeah, exactly. And we have the same situation in many of our territorial lands. They've been the resource extractivism and degraded the lands, so we have to restore and rebuild those lands. And it's with the traditional ecological knowledge and the knowledge of our people that they have from thousands and thousands of years. They have to be leading the way, same way climate crisis or Indigenous knowledge is important, but also in the restoration with conservation with wolves, it needs to be led by Indigenous knowledge. So I think it's going to be really important because a lot of our elders say with the science, our Indigenous science, that's gained over thousands and hundreds of years of knowledge, which is going to be important, especially the worldview we just talked about. I think, it's going to be very important to incorporate that. So it's the best available science we have, and with some of the Western science, and they need to work collaboratively together. And Yellowstone was one of those positive outcomes. And we need more of those stories from our territories so that we can all work together for better recovery objectives and a better way of life. Because we got to come up with those solutions now. We can't continue the way we are.
No, exactly. We're going at speed lightning right now towards, like you said, with what's happening with the climate crisis. With the traditional ecological knowledge, is your knowledge presented to governments to show how viable it is and sustainable it is?
I think there's some projects now that, like what we talked about, but there needs to be more. And there has to be more willingness and openness from like the US Fish and Wildlife Services and government. And some of the legislation, I think that's where some of this wolf treaty was aimed at, is changing some of the legislation as well. And also, I think it's really important with the data, because I know, like when we talk about climate crisis, we talk about, over half the species are becoming extinct now, and decimation of 83%, and it's just mind-boggling, of the mammals on Earth has been accelerated. So we actually accelerated beyond that, and it's unimaginable that we're headed for 96% extinction of the mammals on Earth, and that includes us. Right?
Well,
So
that's
people
that's
don't
the
get
thing,
it.
is that people don't understand is that when they go, then we're next.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm
We're
sorry to
that's I think
interrupt
that's
you.
Oh no, that's all good. I think because there's that connection when we say the wolf is our relative and our ancestor, uh, it's so important to tie that to know they're part of us, and whatever happens to the wolves will happen to us. So I think that's the significant message here, is we need to be able to work together to change that. And it's good that you did that research on the Yellowstone. I seen some of the articles that came out, so they were very positive. But we need more of those that work, and the government to government relations with our tribal people and everyone involved, the NGOs, and the people that have been working in this area for quite some time. We need to all figure out ways, and that might be legislation, that might be protection under the enlisting as endangered. It could be a number of different ways, through a meaningful process, a free, prior, informed consent, and that we all step up in that way, so that we can deal with that, and we can't be hiding behind the economy and just think it's just about the economy, or
Right.
just think it, because really uh, what benefits actually go back to our people. Most of the benefits from the current economy go to 1%, and that's not even going back to everyone, right? So
Wow.
really, it's not the structure that's going to sustain over time. It's the whole economy has to change. So imagine
Right.
all the work that we do for the wolf will have these ripple effects on everything: climate crisis, the economy, our way of life coexisting. But I believe it'll be in a better way, than what we have now, the systems that we have now. And that's the importance, and that's the value we place on the wolves, that that they're going to show us a better way here.
And they do, but the people that have the most control over this situation for the wolves is not understanding what
Yeah.
what they do contribute. What do you feel to the public is the biggest misconception of the wolf?
Oh, just the stories. The stories they grow up on, the big bad wolf, the Red
True,
Riding Hood
right.
type thing. It starts right there, but then that's not the stories we grew up with. We grew up how uh, we originated, like that we had our ancestors came from the wolves. The stories we came up with is how they taught us to hunt, be respectful of the environment and Mother Earth and all of creation, and how to be strong but gentle, and how to care for their family, and how socially important it is to have those connections. So we learned a lot from the wolves, and that's the stories most of our tribal people grew up with, and so we respected and valued the wolf. But the other narrative, the colonial narrative, is you fear the wolf. You're scared of the wolf. The wolf will bite you. The wolf will eat you, type of thing. Which is not. They mostly avoid humans as much as they can, uh, unless I guess they're provoked in a way. But that's the stereotypical image, and then the media, the films, and all of those things exploited it even further. So people grew up in fear of wolves. So, but once I think you connect with them and get to know them, they're truly amazing and just beautiful, and just have this amazing knowledge. And there's a lot of different wolf families, wolf nations from all the four hemispheres. So um, and we could have a better economy with ecotourism, photography, and educational tourism, and learning, and publishing literacy. There's like so much that could come out of a wolf economy, if you will, than just culling and killing them. Um, Yellowstone probably had a lot more people come to their parks because of that, right? And
I agree. Yeah, I
yeah, because at
agree.
one time, ecotourism was bringing in as much as oil and gas. So that's our stats from here north of the border. So I always thought, why aren't we investing
Wow.
more in tourism than oil and gas then, right? Because the numbers were increasing. So I used to know an Indigenous fellow that worked in tourism, so he would send me stats, and that was one of the stats I got on my phone one day. He said, "I'd like to share this with you," and he texted it to me, and I was going like, well, that's a really cool stat. And I told him I'm going to use that stat because it's so important that, that we look at alternative ways, and that could be one of the other ways. And we also need to get better education. So decolonize, like what I said, the stereotypes of wolves,
Right.
and then develop better programs so that we can change those mindsets about wolves and have better education and understanding, and better cultural connections with our wolves. And a lot of our people still hold the sacred ceremonial bundles, for protection of our wolves, and the as guides, and uh, cultural, spiritual knowledge. So those are really important to us. So, they one other stat that's actually in our wolf treaty is that there's about 100,000 wolves worldwide, and there's still um, really concerns for them, and also that when they try to compare the killings by wolves, I think there's more uh, dog bites or dog attacks than there are in regard to wolves. So there's lots of
Yeah.
important steps we have to gather and change that narrative that they've painted about the wolves. So I think, uh, that's a lot is not founded, and that we have to have a good, what do you call it, education and awareness for that. So that we can change that part of the history and also look toward more of a coexistence way forward.
Yeah, I think the programming that you know, since colonization has been created here, I think the programming is way off. Like you said, there's more dog bites than there are wolf attacks. And
Mhm.
I read that in Wyoming, the wolf is listed as a predator, even though wolf predation affects less than 1% of livestock. So
Mhm.
that picture that's being painted is inaccurate completely. And like you said, all you need to do is spend a little bit of time in nature and you can learn so much. You can learn so much from them and what they have to, the teachings they have to offer us,
Yeah.
and how we can live our life, in coexistence with each other. I had a question about, in the treaty, it was mentioned that what affects the gray wolf in the lower 48 states is affecting the wolves at the US Canada border and at the US Mexico border. So, can you explain to us that cause and effect relationship?
Well, a lot of it's the culling. So in the lower 48 states, three of those states, Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana, some 3,500 wolves have been killed since 2011. That's outdated data again, but it's probably more increased. So what
Yeah,
happened is the removal of those state protections on wolves. So they're just opening up for the culling and the aerial killing. I think that's
that's
really,
even unbelievable.
yeah, because that's even without the trophy hunting and trapping, that the packs, uh, are being, opened up that way. And it's the same that's happening up here. The same kind of aerial killing is just totally beyond comprehension what happens to the wolves with that.
There's not even a
So
name for that because that's beyond being aggressive.
it's murder. It's
Yeah,
murder. I just can't imagine, a pack of wolves there, do maybe even not, far away from even our any of the areas, towns or civilization, and a helicopter will come in and just shoot them all and take out whole packs and stuff. I
ugh,
think this atrocious. And so the removal of federal protections is one of the main things. And also, it's not done in consultation with our Indigenous people. And those wolf management plans are just mostly motivated by political interests, not any
mm-hmm.
of the scientific basis, most cases like that. So that in one of the studies, I think they concluded that the existing wolf populations in the Rocky Mountains, Great Lakes, and Southwest are below minimum. So they need viable sizes to revitalize to ensure that their survival. So
Right,
the levels are dropping. That's the other part of it. Uh, and I think that then that happens. The genetics are impacted because of the inbreeding and stuff like that. And
right.
so there's a lot to consider. And then plus wolves require large tracts of territory. So there's a lot of knowledge that's needed to revitalize the wolves. And but I think just by culling and removing them and murdering them isn't the answer. That's what happened to our people,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
our people survived. So we're working for the survival of the wolves now.
What's so sad is, there's so much research done about the wolf. And, I've read in a study as well that when the wolves in Yellowstone, um, their stress hormones are elevated because they know they're being hunted. So could you imagine living your life every day trying to raise your pups and try to survive, but also know that you are being sought after?
Yeah.
You want to
Yeah.
be murdered. And so they have that intuition, they have that inclination that they know that they're not safe.
Mhm.
And in that same study, it mentioned that the pack size has a lot to do with the health and the viability of the existence of the wolf. And the bigger the pack, the better. Um, and I don't know if you would know this answer, but I'm curious as to what the wolf pack size was before colonization to now.
They would have been managed because of, I guess, the leader. There's always like a leader of the pack, and some might split off, into two different packs. But it's like our people, I guess, we would know that balance again in the survival of the how we would be able to hunt in a certain area. So they need certain hunting territories. So if it got too large, I imagine it might branch off, because I
Okay.
don't see how it would continue, because they would sort of know how manageable that would be,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think it. They were a society, like they are a society, just like our people are. So they would have and then they would have to probably find newer hunting ranges and stuff like that. So again, it would be managed that way naturally with our natural law. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's important to understand. And then just the conflict reductions, I think our Indigenous knowledge could bring a lot to that awareness and how they could coexist better. Because right now, I think um, what the different reports are, there needs to be better reporting and inclusion of our Indigenous knowledge into it, so that we could look at addressing any livestock conflicts and how they could coexist in a better way. I think that was some of the other things that happened with the buffalo too, when they were looking at coexisting with cattle, right?
Yeah.
And some areas though need to be like where they're closed off areas, because the state government keeps giving permits and licenses and all that to go into these sensitive areas. And there just needs to be probably research on some of those areas where maybe that they would set apart those lands and those areas, and then so that that we know we shouldn't be putting cattle or houses or invading those sensitive habitat areas. So I think
Yeah.
that's in part in working more with the knowledge of the wolf and our Indigenous knowledge on a better conflict reduction type programs, and where we could work together in a better way, so we can all exist.
Right. And I thank you for bringing up that point. It's not taken into account that we are encroaching into, we're well beyond encroaching into sensitive places. I mean, there's really no real wild spaces left because we
Yeah.
just keep moving into these areas where these ecosystems were once thriving and the wildlife knew exactly how to take care of the land, basically just by their sheer existence. And
Yeah.
it's shameful that not any of this is taken into account.
Yeah, because we have to all work, and the World Treaty is the goal is that um, the tribal peoples to be equal partners with the state and the federal and provincial authorities in the true recovery and future management of the wolf. So that's where the tribes were working towards, and the treaty could still be signed. It's still open for signature, and they can still sign the treaty to be a partner and supporter
Mm-hmm.
for the intent and spirit intent of the treaty. So I think that's wonderful that it's open like that, and to many of our First Nations in north of the border and south of the border, it's still circulating, and that your program picked up on that. That's really great. So more listeners could learn about it, but also additional additional tribes, if they're interested, could look at that. Because when we do a lot of the work, it's all by ceremony. So we are looking at a 4 hemisphere ceremony to bring all the wolf nations together. So that up here in the north of the Medicine Line, we have quite a few nations that their origins are from the wolves. So it's pretty interesting to hear the stories. And in our nation and the Secwepemc Nation, we have our stories of the wolf. One is the wolf and wolverine. Uh, they used to like live together, and because they're both hunters, they learned from each other. But the area started getting depleted with animals, so Wolf decided to move to a bigger area, and he was a very successful hunter, and there became less beaver where the Wolverine was, so he went to visit his brother, the wolf. But Wolf didn't share his food with them and kind of insulted him in a certain way. And so then Wolf's area became less, I guess, a lot of encroachment and stuff like that. And then he went to Wolverine, and Wolverine treated him the same. And so what it teaches us in our laws is we got to treat and respect each other, and share your food when people come into your lodge or your home. You share your food and you treat them with respect. And also, I guess there's so many ways to look at that story. Respecting the territory, the hunting territory, when respecting the way food is provided as well, not to overhunt or over. And then if there is other people encroaching in the area, that you have to have those natural law management principles so that you can assure food for everyone. So that's just a little story from our neck of the woods, and I'm sure a lot of the tribes have their stories too. So the wolf continues to be a great teacher to us. And there is a film called Almost Ancestors, and it's about the Mexican wolves, and they tell a beautiful story in that film. And I could share the link with you, and
Yes.
your listeners could connect on with it. It just shows and depicts the way our tribal people are so closely related. So Almost Ancestors is a very important film if anyone wants to learn more about the wolves and what's happening with them in the southern hemisphere, and the support that's needed for the protection and revitalization of our wolves.
Thank you for mentioning about that film. And it's not a long film, and it's very engaging, and it's thought provoking, and it helps to provide a perspective for other people to understand the importance of the wolf and the importance of the wolf to Indigenous cultures, and why the wolf is really important to everyone here now that lives here. And it's not just a situation that pertains to the wolf. It pertains to all of us. And I really liked how there's this understanding after you watch that film. It's
Yeah,
very
and
important to understand how this is I don't know how to explain it, but like just knowing that the wolf is your ancestor, and there is this lineage and this knowledge that is provided, that is so important, that we can't miss out on that.
yeah, I think it's a good opportunity just to learn more and be part of something. Even if you're watching the film, you're educating yourself and you're doing
Yeah.
something. You're not just sitting back. And I think that's going to be so important to do. I enjoyed watching it, and it really uh, uh, connected me in a way with the other tribes that I think are coming together. And I think it's a beautiful way that you know it, that's being shown to us, that um, we're not working in isolation, and we do
Mm-hmm.
have a collective way we can come together. And it's been our responsibility as people from the beginning of time to take care of our relatives. So, and the wolf is so much part of that. So there's an opportunity to support a healing future for the Mexican gray wolves and tribal communities, and acknowledging, what's happened to the wolves happened to our Indigenous people. So
Right.
the wrongs of the past, and then speaking about the injustices that happened, and how we could become a better future for the respects the lives and the freedom and the safety and the rights of everyone, including our wolves and us as human beings.
Yes. Thank you for that, Judy. Thank you. What would you suggest people can do to help Indigenous nations ensure the survival of the wolf?
Well, I think the one thing is understanding that a lot what we're seeing out there is not is stereotyped, and it's research that we need to do to get the factual information, like what we're doing here today, right? We're going underneath a lot of the information that's just based on fear and stereotypical, and learning more about the issue is important. We can support the legislation that is being introduced by U.S. Senator Cory Booker, and he's about to introduce legislation that's been influenced from the Wolf Treaty. So maybe in the near future shows you could have more information on that. And I know the wolf cullings that are happening, we have to be able to push back on those bills that were passed and signed into law. They demonstrate that they're not, only hunting, the wolves to extinction. They're just continually continuing the colonial doctrine of discovery, and just, wiping out the wolves, really, and wiping out our people. So, um, how does how do we together work together, working on the legislation protection, and not accepting those changes that were made, because our wolves are so many are being killed during that time. So the delisting was really critical. We need to get the protections back, and also we have to be able to save the life of the wolves, to save our own selves, and what we're doing to humanity.
Yes.
And then, yeah, so there's a lot people can do. I hope your podcast reaches a lot of people, and that we continue this discussion, and we continue finding ways to work together collaboratively. They can sign the Wolf Treaty is another way. And also, I think the other part is become part of the solution, not just a bystander when all of these cullings and uh, you know removal of the wolves happen. I think it's going to be really important, and be more involved. And then in work, as we talked about, bringing in the uh, traditional ecological knowledge, I think that's important for that conflict reduction. I think we talked about that.
Yeah, we did.
And it's really going to be really important. And we must not let the state, provincial, and federal governments continue to define the issues as environmental or wildlife. I think that's another narrow view that they do. So they kind of rule out our culture, and they rule out the interconnections, and they rule out how it's part of a bigger picture. And
Most
um,
definitely. That
and
is not considered at all.
yeah, no, and it's uh, also a social justice issue, because what's happened to the wolves happened to our Indigenous people. So, they just try to narrow it so that they don't have to have accountability. So we have to push for that accountability. And, I think with our connection with the wolves, and so many people are becoming connected, like yourself, what you were saying, the wolf is like calling you. So the wolf spirit is calling you
Mhm.
because the wolves need the help right now. So they're calling many nations right now of all different walks of life. I've seen people come forward and ask the same questions you asked. What can I do? How can I support these protections and the work that's being done by the tribes and by the nations? And so an individual can be very effective, so especially when we collectively come together. So we can't stand on the sidelines to see the decimation of the wolf,
No,
and also make that connection that's part of what happened to our Indigenous peoples. So, they our tribal people and the people that are coming together, that the wolf's calling together, is demonstrating that unity that we need. And the wolf treaty is an example of that.
and I think that was a very key point to share with listeners, is that what's happening to the wolves happened to Indigenous people. There is a very strong connection there, and the interconnectedness is so important. And what's happening is there's many people that are short-sighted. They're not seeing the bigger picture of what's happening when we decimate um, these respected species. I did want to just mention to listeners that in the United States, wolves are listed on the endangered species list, except in the Northern Rockies, but that is a huge area, and it includes Idaho, Montana, most of Wyoming, parts of Eastern Oregon, Washington, and Northern Utah. So that is a big region.
It's
And
huge. And
so
then, of
those are
course,
all state run. So Idaho
yes,
plans on killing 60% of its wolves.
yeah, it's not acceptable to totally wipe out those wolf families, those populations. And
No,
for what purpose, right? And the mountains that you're talking about, they extend into north of the border, so they affect our wolves here as well. So
right.
it's all connected, and that's the important work we have to be able to do, is not accept those unilateral state and U.S. Fish and wildlife decisions. They weren't involving our nations, and also a lot of the public they didn't involve in, like unilateral decisions, and the lives of those wolf packs, the families that they're affecting, being just wiped out forever, and at a time where they should be protected.
At a time where they should be protected, they have the right to be protected. And we actually really need their presence right now in the ecosystem.
Yeah, everywhere, all through Turtle Island, through North America, we should be including the wolves in that climate change management and ecosystem protection. That way, they're part of that recovery we need.
Right. Exactly. Judy, it has been an honor to speak with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share your message with us, and so that this message can be spread out far and wide.
Yeah, thank you. And the collective knowledge I have is just working with a lot of the knowledge keepers and our elders and our different people in ceremony throughout the different lands. And the Wolf Treaty was, part of a big movement where the tribes were coming together with their own laws, and it was through ceremony. So I was just glad to be part of it through the Global Indigenous Council, and to work with these amazing, amazing people that are doing a lot of this work in their own tribes. So I just wanted to honor them. It's not me. I'm learning from them, and I'm supporting them, and I just advocate what I'm hearing and learning, and that's part of our laws. We don't put ourselves up higher than others, especially, especially the wolves that taught us all of this since time immemorial. It's really originating. A lot of the knowledge is originating and has originated from our wolves who are our ancestors.
Thank you, Judy.